The Mar-a-Lago Accord. What is it, and how bad is it really for your treasuries? Hello, members, super savers, and bond course fans. I hope you're healthy and well. Some of you have asked us about the recent buzz around President Trump's Mar-a-Lago Accord and what it really means for you. So we had a look, and it turns out the Mar-a-Lago Accord is actually a fascinating topic because it may tell us how President Trump and his inner circle really think and what their ultimate goal for debt and trading relationships with the rest of the world could look like. We may be on the cusp of generational change in the international trade and financial systems. That is one of the very first sentences in the Mar-a-Lago Accord's executive summary. And I think that many in our community would agree with this, some with more hope and relief, and some with more fear and apprehension. But what makes this statement really relevant is that it comes from Stephen Miron. Stephen Miron is not only President Trump's current nominee for chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors and had worked for President Trump before in the Treasury during his first administration. He also published this paper back in November 2024, shortly after President Trump's election, A User's Guide to Restructuring the Global Trading System. The paper from Myron tries to lay out what kind of economic program we, the American people, should expect from the new administration with regard to tariffs, the dollar, and our debt, our treasuries. And this paper has also been making some waves on Wall Street and beyond recently, after market strategist Jim Bianco started talking about it. And maybe not coincidentally, this happened just a few days before Myron appeared before the Senate for his confirmation hearing on February 27th. But because A User's Guide to Restructuring the Global Trading System isn't really such an exciting, catchy title, the ideas that Myron explains in the paper are more often referred to in shorthand as the Mar-a-Lago Accord in the news. So, with that in mind, here are the three topics that we'll be covering in today's video. 1. What is the Mar-a-Lago Accord? And is it even a thing? 2. How might the Mar-a-Lago Accord impact the role of treasuries as the safest, most liquid, fixed income investment in the world? And 3. What does this mean for you, and what should you be watching? As usual, here's our front video disclaimer. For a detailed disclaimer, please refer to the end of this video. Let's dive in now, folks. What is the Mar-a-Lago Accord? And is it even a thing? So this, where we as a nation currently stand at this point in time, is not the first time in history that the global financial and trading order has been undergoing rapid change. And in the past, some of these turning points have also been associated with so-called accords. Accord sounds fancy, but essentially means an international agreement that may not necessarily be considered a full legal treaty. One of these accords was the Plaza Accord in 1985, in which the leading Western powers of the day came together in the Plaza Hotel in New York and agreed to weaken the dollar in order to improve U.S. competitiveness in manufacturing and exports. Sounds somewhat familiar, right? And fun fact, President Trump is closely linked to the Plaza Hotel. He owned it between 1988 and 1995. And during his ownership period, President Trump even made a cameo appearance in the Plaza Hotel for the movie Home Alone 2, which, as an aside, is a Lammer family Christmas movie favorite. So, against that backdrop, I guess some folks couldn't resist the temptation to label the ideas in Myron's paper about a potential agreement that could be somewhat similar to the 1985 Plaza Accord, the Mar-a-Lago Accord, after President Trump's private club and residence in Florida that has seen its fair share of prominent guests and deal-making as well. And as the name seems to have stuck, the Mar-a-Lago Accord is also the name we will use for this paper instead of A User's Guide to Restructuring the Global Trading System. But to make it absolutely clear, at this point, the so-called Mar-a-Lago Accord is not an accord, nor any other international agreement, nor even a concrete plan, and it might actually never be implemented as such. What it is, though, is a collection of ideas about what the U.S. can do about a persistent overvaluation of the U.S. dollar that is seen to hurt U.S. competitiveness in manufacturing and exports. And as I touched upon towards the beginning of this video, the Mar-a-Lago Accord is especially fascinating because it may give us a glimpse into how President Trump and his inner cabinet really think and what their ultimate goal may be. The basic idea behind the Mar-a-Lago Accord is as follows. The US dollar is the undisputed global reserve currency, so foreign governments, businesses, and even individuals have a tendency to buy more dollars than they would actually need than if it was just for their own concrete purchases of US-made software, movies, and weapons. And because these foreign governments, businesses, and even individuals want to have a part of their savings or reserves in US dollars, this extra demand for our currency will push the exchange rate of the dollar up above where it should be if it was just about buying and selling goods and services. Jim Bianco illustrates the core issue on a recent Bloomberg podcast as follows. The trade-weighted US dollar, the exchange rate of the dollar against the currencies of the countries that we trade with the most, is up 218% over the past 40 years. The dollar being up so much means that the currencies of countries such as Canada and Mexico, our top two trading partners in 2024, even ahead of China, have become much cheaper versus the dollar over the past 40 years. And this clearly has helped those countries to snatch their share of manufacturing from the US, or so the argument goes. Just think about all the cars and car parts and other goods imported from Canada and Mexico into the US and paid for cheaply with our strong dollar. If you accept this line of thinking and want to help US manufacturing, then the question becomes, what can we do about it? Stephen Myron's paper says there are two main tools to deal with unfair currency exchange rates. The first main tool is to impose tariffs on imports from these countries. This has already been started by the administration, even if in sometimes halting and confusing ways. Tariffs in this argument can serve three purposes to help U.S. competitiveness. First, they bring in revenues for the government. Second, they make production in the U.S. more attractive, supporting domestic jobs in high value-added manufacturing and other areas. And third, they give the U.S. leverage to negotiate favorable new agreements and treaties with other countries. And do note that for the last two purposes, shift manufacturing back into the U.S. and create a bargaining chip for negotiations, you don't even need to actually impose the tariffs. Sometimes the mere threat of tariffs may be sufficient to achieve what you want, as Trump understands very well. But we'll leave tariffs for another day and focus now on the second available tool to improve U.S. competitiveness that Myron mentions in his paper. The second main tool is to weaken the U.S. dollar against the currencies of our main trading partners. Now, while imposing tariffs is relatively straightforward, if we set aside the risk of unintended side effects like inflation and so on, the task of weakening your own currency in a controlled way without triggering a meltdown in the financial markets can be a bit more tricky if you don't want to impose outright currency controls and fixed exchange rates. Plus, while the administration seems to want to weaken the exchange rate of the dollar to regain industrial competitiveness, at the same time, it seems Trump wants to keep and safeguard the central role of the dollar as the world's reserve currency as well, for all the influence and international leverage that this gives us. Yes, it appears President Trump wants to have his cake and eat it too. And Myron's Mar-a-Lago Accord, or paper, acknowledges this. President Trump has emphasized the value he places on the dollar's status as the global reserve currency and threatened to punish countries that move away from the dollar. I expect this tension to be resolved by policies that aim to preserve the status of the dollar, but improve burden sharing with our trading partners. But what exactly does improved burden sharing with our trading partners actually mean? And how could this be achieved? That, my financial friend, brings us to the next section of today's video. How might the Mar-a-Lago Accord impact the role of Treasuries as the safest, most liquid, fixed income investment in the world? So, if we want to share the burden of having the world's reserve currency and leading the West, so to speak, one of the main proposals to achieve that goal is to make our allies pay more for their own defense and security. This can be done in several different ways. Make them spend more on their own militaries, for example, is one of them, which would reduce the burden on the U.S. armed forces. Another idea that has gained traction recently is to make our allies pay for being in the U.S. security zone by buying U.S. Treasuries. The Mar-a-Lago paper seems to like the idea of asking our allies to purchase US Treasuries to help fund their own security. But then it quotes a proposal that takes things even one step further and floats the thought of making our allies buy not just any treasuries, but rather special and not yet invented 100-year zero-coupon treasury bonds. Now, as fixed income experts and many of our members and Bond Course fans know, zero-coupon bonds are bonds that do not pay regular interest. Instead, they're issued at a discount, sold for less than their face value essentially, but then pay back their full face value when they mature. And the difference between the discounted purchase price and the repayment at face value is essentially the interest the buyer gets on their investment, like T-bills, except that T-bills have a maximum term of 52 weeks, and what is being floated as part of the Mar-a-Lago paper is 99 years longer than that. There are also quite a few other differences between T-bills and longer-dated Treasury zeros. If you need more details or want a refresher, I've linked this member video on Treasury zeros in the first pinned comment below this video for your convenience. Bond beginners, folks, please refer back to Module 5, Video F on Treasury zeros for more specifics on zero-coupon Treasury bonds. But back to the proposed 100-year zero-coupon Treasury, or security bonds, from the Mar-a-Lago paper. These 100-year zero-coupon bonds would have to be issued by the Treasury at a very steep discount for a 100-year maturity. But they would allow the U.S. to both help finance our current budget deficit and debt pile, and at the same time reduce our ongoing interest payments, as we would not have to pay any ongoing interest on them either for the next 100 years. Oh, and one more point, and a very important point actually. These 100-year Treasury zeros that are being floated as an idea, they would be non-tradable or illiquid, meaning that holders of these bonds would not be able to sell them in the market before they mature. Apart from the fact that it sounds a bit like just kicking the can down the road, there may really be a lot to like about this idea from a U.S. perspective. Free money for 100 years, basically. The obvious question, of course, is why would anyone buy an illiquid bond that will only mature in 100 years, but not pay any interest in the meantime? Well, here's the thing. We could actually imagine that the U.S., with a bit of convincing and cajoling, would be able to strike a grand trade and security bargain with our closest traditional allies that induces them to start buying some of these 100-year zero-coupon Treasury bonds. And I assume President Trump would count this as a victory, and it might even help the U.S. budget and competitiveness a bit. But our closest traditional allies, namely the European Union, the UK, Japan, and Korea, are not as dominant on the world financial stage as they used to be. In the current world, most of the dollars available to be sold by governments are in the hands of Middle Eastern and East Asian governments. Some of these nations are not as friendly as the Europeans were during the Cold War. So the question is not just how the Trump administration could achieve such a forward-looking grand bargain with our allies, but also how much it would really move the needle, so to speak. If you wanted to get to meaningful numbers fast for the proposed 100-year zero-coupon Treasury bonds, it might not be enough to just rely on voluntary new purchases by well-meaning allies. Rather, it may be potentially necessary to force the hand of current Treasury owners by using even more pressure to get them to swap some or all of their existing U.S. government bond holdings into such 100-year security bonds. And yes, the Mar-a-Lago paper does mention some subtle and not so subtle pressure on allies to get them to swap their bonds. 1. Security zones are a public good, and countries on the inside must fund it by buying treasuries. 2. Security zones are a capital good. They are best funded by century bonds, not short-term bills. 3. Security zones have barbed wires. Unless you swap your bills for bonds, tariffs will keep you out. And these points here are what makes some market observers, us included, a bit less than comfortable. This Bloomberg article expresses this well. Putting pressure on allies to engage in a debt swap or to buy century bonds could do unpredictable damage to the Treasury market's reputation. So, just to be entirely clear, the idea for the Mar-a-Lago Accord is to make some of our foreign allies swap some of their current Treasury holdings into these new 100-year zero-coupon Treasury bonds to help pay for their security. At no point does the paper consider that domestic American investors would swap their existing Treasury holdings into these new security bonds, be it voluntary or not so voluntary. But here's the danger. In the worst case scenario, a more or less voluntary swap of existing treasuries by foreign holders could also make domestic and private holders of treasuries, meaning you, me, and the American companies that hold treasuries, a bit nervous. Even if we're not directly impacted by a swap outside our borders, it could convince some of us to sell our treasury holdings as well, out of fear that we might be forced to swap our own bonds into something like these 100-year non-tradable Treasury Zeros too at some point in the future. And if this fear spreads and leads to massive sales coming into the market, this might potentially result in a real debt crisis that could spill over into the entire US and global economy very fast. I mean, would we in this community be so keen to hold onto our treasuries if those treasuries were no longer the safest, most liquid, fixed income investment in the world? If we had the slightest inkling of fear that our government might force us to swap them for 100-year Treasury Zeros? I suspect the answer to this question for many in our community would be probably not, which brings us nicely to the next section of today's video. What does this mean for you, and what should you be watching? To say it once more, it's very important to remember that the Mar-a-Lago Accord at this point is nothing concrete. It's literally a piece of paper, and the proposals within it might never even be implemented, as I said at the beginning. That said, personally, I don't think we should dismiss it as completely irrelevant either. It was written by Trump's nominee for chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, after all, and in my mind, might give us as good an insight as we can get at this point into the philosophy and thinking of some of Trump's inner circle. And another observation. The predictions that Myron made back in November in his paper about Trump going in aggressively and forcefully with tariffs early on have pretty much come true. Tariffs are a familiar tool to President Trump and his team, since they were used with success extensively in 2018 and 2019 in trade negotiations with China. Those tariffs passed with little discernible macroeconomic consequence. Inflation remained stable or even declined, and GDP growth continued to perform quite well despite the Fed's hiking cycle. It is therefore reasonable to expect tariffs once again to be a primary tool. Before any of you rush to sell your treasuries, though, you should also know that Myron does make some more reassuring predictions about Trump handling currency policy and treasuries more carefully. Although volatility risks are material, President Trump has shown repeated concern for the health of financial markets throughout his administration. 1. There is good reason to be more cautious with changes to dollar policy than with changes to tariffs. 2. Steps to strengthen undervalued currencies will likely not be taken until risk can be mitigated, which we read to mean don't worry too much. The new administration won't rush into things with regards to our currency and our treasuries. Tariffs are different, and they will make sure the markets and individual investors can keep faith in the dollar and our treasuries. So, to summarize, here's our personal take on the Mar-a-Lago Accord, or paper. 1. While not a concrete agreement or plan, the Mar-a-Lago paper might give us a glimpse into how Trump and those closest to him think about tariffs, trade, and treasuries. The underlying theme is America first, as Trump makes no secret of, and as such, the administration may not be shy to use the might of the U.S. to come to favorable agreements with other countries, even if it may come at the expense of some historical allies and friendly relationships. 2. Myron was right when he predicted that Trump would go in early and forcefully with new tariffs, so I can only assume and hope that he'll be proven correct again when he says that steps to strengthen undervalued currencies will likely not be taken until risk can be mitigated, especially as he might have a seat at the table as the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. In that sense, my expectation at this point in time remains that the Treasury will stick to its long-standing mantra to remain regular and predictable, and we do not anticipate a forced swap of existing Treasuries into 100-year, zero-coupon safety bonds in the foreseeable future, nor the potential market disturbance that might follow such a move if it actually happened. That said, I don't have a working crystal ball, and if anyone did, I'm sure their crystal ball is also broken by now, just like mine. It's hard to keep up with the speed and changes that are happening at the moment. So as we often do on this channel, we will continue to watch developments and report back to all of our Diamond Nest Egg regulars. No one is 100% right all the time, but for the time being, given what we know and understand about the Mar-a-Lago paper, we are still laddering our T-bills as we have been. And we will continue to hang onto the longer-dated Treasury bonds that we have in our portfolio. And by the way, Warren Buffett doesn't seem to be all too concerned either, as we talked about in this recent video here on Berkshire Hathaway's large and growing portfolio of T-bills. What about you? Are you worried about your Treasuries? And if not, what's keeping you up at night, financially speaking? Drop a comment below and let me and the community know so we can see if we can discuss and address any of those worries. All right, members, super savers, and bond course fans, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. And as always, if you want to learn more about Treasuries and bond investing while yields are still quite attractive, then check out this video here on our beginner and intermediate level bond courses. And if you're interested in learning more about real estate investment trusts, REITs, come join our member zone and check out our latest member videos on REIT investing. This one here was just posted a few days ago. I've also linked all the details on our bond courses and YouTube Super Saver membership below this video for your convenience. And see you again very soon with more brand new wealth building content for your financial journey.